This is Awareness Explorers.
Welcome back, fellow explorers, to Awareness Explorers. I'm your co-host, Jonathan Robinson, and with my friend and co-host,
Brian Tom O'Connor.
And as we often do, we get to explore a topic together that has to do with awakening. And this one's going to be interesting because in our brief discussion about before we hit record, I thought we had a slightly different view on this. And I think our different views help listeners to get a more expanded version because, I'm presenting the correct view and you're presenting the ridiculous view. And between us, everybody gets, what I found actually, which surprises me is half the time I think that your view actually outshines mine. And that means that good things are happening in our discussion.
Oh, well, that's pretty generous attitude of you. I'm not sure it's true, but it's nice to hear. But I like the sublime to the ridiculous comparison. Maybe we can meet in the middle and be perfectly okay, to coin a phrase.
That could be possible. I hope so. Anyway, so the topic that we were discussing a little bit before, and we're going to talk about now, is life force energy, sometimes referred to as prana or chi. And I think before we dive into its relationship to awakening, we first have to define what the hell we're talking about. So why don't you give a first stab at that, Brian?
Well, I actually wanted to talk about life force, actually not in order to define it, which we will do in a little bit, but I wanted to explore this idea. What if the way that universal energy expresses itself is through form? I mean, what if you don't have to deny the individual person, but instead see it as universal life force expressing itself through temporary form, like waves in the ocean are simply oceanic energy expressing itself in apparently separate things called waves.
Mm-hmm. So when people talk about, say, prana or chi, how do you see that relating to this universal life force energy?
Well, they seem to be the same thing because when I looked up prana and chi, the definitions of them seem to do with the life force or the energy that flows through all living things in the universe. And that's what I'm talking about. And I'd love it if you want to go into defining them in a little bit.
Well, rather than use a Webster's definition, one way I kind of define it is how much energy I feel flowing through me, especially of a higher vibration. You can drink caffeine or coffee and have a lot of energy going through, or take a pill, but there's a natural life force energy that one can access, and we'll talk about how to do that. And that's how I define it, as whether I feel like I'm really in touch with that natural innate energy.
Right, right. I know what you mean because I often feel that same thing too. I tend to define it as when I get the feeling that there's a certain hum of creativity that's flowing through me. And
Mm-hmm.
after it just usually happens after it happens. During it, I think I'm doing it. And afterwards, I get this overwhelming feeling that I didn't do that, that it happened through me.
Well, the way our language works is we always have these black and white dichotomies, and really nothing in the world is one or the other, except for maybe computer code. So I like to look at it as a continuum. 100 is God working through me. I wasn't even there, and one is it was pure ego working through me. And I think of when I write my books, there's like a constant movement going on. And that can be true in meditation. It could be true really in any activity, that sometimes we're allowing the more pure form of life force energy moving through us and saying things or creating things. And sometimes we're coming more from an ego perspective. And part of the question is, how do you move up that frequency chain so that it's a little bit less of you being in the way and more of a pure energy moving through you?
Yeah, exactly. And I think being in the way is the key phrase here. My feeling is that the more we get ourselves out of the way, the more we get our ego out of the way, the more we allow it to happen, I think the stronger it can flow into form.
Yeah, definitely. Now, one thing I want to mention to our listeners is we're not equating life force energy with Kundalini. Kundalini, we're putting as a slightly different topic. Sometimes people have Kundalini awakenings, and maybe there's a connection to life force energy, maybe not. But we're more talking in terms of things like prana and chi, which are more within our control in some ways. And one of the topics that we just brought up is what obscures it, what hides it, what lessens it. And trying not to sound glib, almost everything we do, you know. So I'm thinking, some of the categories of what lessens life force energy or our connection to it would be things like a lot of thoughts or indulgence in really anything, scrolling, food, sugar, bad habits, smoking, drinking. Then there's things, psychological things like trauma or our belief systems. Sometimes people have a belief system where it doesn't allow them to access their innate energy. So there's a lot of things in modern day life that really suppress it, if you want to use that word. And I'm wondering how you look at that.
Well, I tend to agree with that, except that I look at it from just a slightly different angle, which is that all the things like, for instance, that you mentioned, smoking or doom scrolling or things like that, are things that we do that our organism does in order to control our experience,
Mm-hmm.
in order to feel better, and or in order to not feel something we don't want to feel. So it's not the smoking or the doom scrolling that gets in the way. It is the attempt to control our experience.
Yeah, that's interesting. And so the hypothesis would be that if you let go of controlling your experience, you naturally start to tune into the life force energy that is kind of hidden underneath that.
Yeah, that's the hypothesis, and you sort of allow it to express itself. I mean, it wants to come out, and you just sort of like, I see this kind of uncorking and allowing it to flow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's an interesting perspective. I look at it a little bit differently, although I don't disagree with that. But I think life force energy is something that can be manipulated or increased or enhanced with various methods other than just allowing or more surrender, which would be the way I would describe what you're talking about.
Right, exactly. And I think we've come to the point where we're the point on which we differ. On the other hand, I'm open to hear the other ways that you have in mind of
Like the
trying
right
to,
way rather
yeah, the
than the
right
ridiculous way.
way. Yeah, my idea is that you get out of the way and you let it happen, and it is not something actually within control. And as we mentioned when we talked about it, one of my favorite terms is someone told me they went to an Adyashanti retreat and saw a sign on the wall that said "No manipulation." And ever since I heard that, that's been like my mantra.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Well, as we often talk about, there's two wings to everything, and certainly when it comes to life force energy, we'll call your wing the allowing or surrender wing of no manipulation, where it can naturally blossom or already is if we're not busy batting it away with all our various ways of doing that. And sometimes I realize I am batting it away, like I start to feel a lot of energy going through me. It can feel uncomfortable or yeah, uncomfortable in some ways. So I, eat a couple donuts or something like that. Do you ever do that? Do you ever notice that?
Do I ever notice that it gets so strong I want to bat it away, you mean?
Yeah, yeah.
Um, Not so much that I want to bat it away, but sometimes the it does become intense, intensely blissful, so much so that I start to yearn for mundane activities again.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Yeah, I've developed a term that I use with clients that helps people make a distinction that they may not have had before, because I haven't found a word that exists that helps describe this experience. So the word is blasistance, which I made up. Blasistance means resistance to bliss.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah, it's a definite experience.
It is.
And I wonder if that a word exists in other cultures, like in India or something like that. But since it doesn't exist in Western culture, I made up the word. And once you have a word for it, you start to see it a lot. That we do a lot of things to avoid feeling more energized or blissful. And it's a strange phenomena.
It is kind of strange. I don't see it as a problem, though, for me
Uh-huh.
personally. It's more like because I'm so confident that it's there whenever I want to dip into it,
Mm.
that if it starts to get really, really strong and all of a sudden I realize that, a part of me wants to read the newspaper or do a crossword puzzle,
Hmm.
I can sort of, I can sort of say, okay, well, that bliss is there when I want it. Right now, I feel like doing a crossword puzzle. And then I realize that doing a crossword puzzle is part of the life force expressing itself in form.
Uh-huh. That's a good attitude. I look at it as like I want to increase my ability to feel bliss before I resist it.
Aha.
Like
Yeah,
like a muscle, you want to increase the ability. I mean, this also changing the subject a little bit shows up in sex as well. Like, men often will race to orgasm because the feeling of bliss and pleasant sensations can be hard to hold without trying to complete it in some way. And as I've gotten better at holding bliss in meditation and in life, I've been able to hold more of sexual energy as well before needing to, climax.
well, that sounds wonderful.
Do you have any similar experiences, or have you not thought of it that way?
I've never really thought of it that way. I've never made the equation that way, but I have experienced that just enjoying the moment and delaying the end and making it last longer sometimes is absolutely wonderful. And then every
Yeah,
once in a while, it seems like, okay, this is going to be a short one. That
right, right, right. Yeah,
they're
but
both
having
enjoyable, but it's good
that
to have both in your repertoire.
exactly, exactly. And in fact, Tantra, which we haven't really talked much about, is a system of using sexual energy to come closer to God. So part of that involves not climaxing usually and really holding a lot of energy before you have to let it go.
Yeah, I've certainly heard a lot of descriptions of that. I've never practiced it firsthand, though.
Yeah. No, it's practiced obviously in the East and it can be valuable, definitely. But we were talking about how there's a lot of ways to suppress this energy, and everybody has their favorite method. My favorite method probably is eating. But a lot of people it's doom scrolling or getting lost in thoughts or whatever. Then the question becomes, well, how do you increase it? Well, one way is to stop doing so many of those things.
Yeah,
But
that's the simple
yeah,
way to put it.
that is certainly one way. But being that I tend to be more in the category of manipulation, I've explored things like qigong and tai chi and breath practices like pranayama. Do you have any experience with those?
I have tried some of them, but I realized they weren't for me. And for a while, I was despairing about that. I like, for instance, I tried pranayama, and I realized I didn't have the discipline to keep it up. And I thought, oh my God, I'm a terrible person. I'm a terrible meditator. I'm a terrible breather. And it was when I let go of all judgment about how what this Brian character's nature and personality is that it no longer became a problem.
Well, that's great. I think of all the people who are born into a system that doesn't work for them, and then they think that they're a bad person or that they're non-spiritual. And really what's going on is that particular method or system is not working for them.
Yeah, well, see, I've always seen meditation as the path of failure. We
Say more.
try to use meditation to manipulate our experience, and it's only when we fail over and over again and then give up trying that that our true nature starts to reveal itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that perspective. That's one wing, and one that I personally have moved much more towards than my previous "let's manipulate our way into God" approach.
But
But
still,
no,
I'd love to hear more ideas about increasing the life force if you have them.
well, so the main methods I've explored have been pranayama, which is breath stuff, and then Tai Chi and Qigong. And all of them are based in the fact that you can bring more life force energy into your body. And I think they're also predicated on the fact that as you do that, you become potentially closer to your true nature, God, peace, whatever, however that system might look at it.
Mhm.
And I actually went to China 15 years ago with Montauk Chia, a famous teacher, and it was all based on Qigong. And we'd go to various monasteries and do hours of Qigong. And I was as high as a kite. We did probably 2 hours of practice a day. And it was fantastic. You feel all this life force energy moving through you. And it's a little bit like an MDMA drug trip where you start to feel really euphoric, and everybody looks like they're much more loving, or you feel more compassion than normally, or that's what happened to me. But a lot of people, as they get more of this life force energy, it can bring out their obstacles more,
Yeah.
meaning it can make them angry, it can make them hypersexual, it can make them want to eat donuts all day.
Sure, sure, I can relate. But and I certainly have nothing against being high as a kite. I think that's absolutely wonderful. But being high as a kite is something temporary, and being grumpy is part of all there is too. And my sense is that we hold away, we hold off grumpiness or suffering, if you
Mhm.
want to use a broader word for it, and only when we allow that to be there as well, and when we can go from high as a kite to grumpy as a gopher. I don't know. I just made that. I don't know. I don't know.
Grumpy as a gopher. I don't know. The gophers in my yard seem very happy, Brian.
Okay, so let's say what grumpy as a grumpy old man in the movies.
Yeah, okay.
Um, that that this is all part of life, and it's part of the ebb and flow, and there to be experienced. And when we when we ease up the resistance to those two opposites, we start to notice that this life force is always and already there through all experience.
Hmm. I like that partly because it's a little bit new for me. I was at a retreat recently with some teachers I respect a lot. One, Luciano, I hope to have him on the podcast soon. And he's in a very elevated experience and has been for a while. And at the time, I was suffering from shingles, which was incredibly painful. And I've never been at a meditation retreat while in intense physical pain. That was a unique experience.
Mhm.
And so he was guiding me during this time, and he said, what are you experiencing? I said, well, a lot of physical pain. And he said, great, just, really be like, I'm annoyed at it too, because I don't want it to be there. He said, great, just fully be your annoyance at the physical pain, be fully expressed as you are angry at this pain. And that was helpful because, I think, well, that's not spiritual. I'm supposed to be all accepting and, thank you and all that. And that's like a level of filter between me and reality. The reality is I am really angry at this physical pain. So be that. And he allowed me to do that. And as I did that, things that were kind of stuck began to unstick. So I entered into a flow of emotion, sometimes anger, sometimes bliss, sometimes focused on other things. And it was, my experience was now in a flow rather than stuck in resisting.
Yeah,
And
well, yeah, go ahead.
I think that's kind of what you're talking about.
Oh, yeah, that's wisdom in my book and beautifully described as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's definitely one wing of the plane. The other wing is using our knowledge of chi and prana to do things that might help it to flow better. Tai Chi, Qigong, acupuncture, I think, is part of that. I'm probably missing a few. I think eating really well can be part of that as well, that can increase the amount of life force energy in you. And those are valid spiritual methods. Although I have seen, and this is interesting, I have seen people who practice some of those things a lot are still jerks.
Uh-huh.
They're just bigger jerks because now they have more life force energy.
Right. Well, why are they jerks, do you think? What is it about what's the jerkiness about them?
Well, there's the personality obstacles, like maybe they're narcissistic or they have anger issues or whatever that aren't mitigated by having more energy in the system.
Right. Yeah, and anger issues in particular to me fall into the category of control.
Uh-huh.
Most, people who allow things to be as they are not as angry as people who need to control everything.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's my hypothesis is that these people have a lot of, I mean, it may be wrong. I mean, how did they get that energy in the first place? In other words, if the way to achieve the energy is to let go of control, how come they're not letting go of control when it's there? And that's a mystery I can't really explain unless I were to talk about a specific person and get to know them.
Well, that harkens back. I like the word harkens. You never get to use that word anymore. That
Exactly.
harkens back to our episode on compartmentalization. That
Yeah.
sometimes people can be very surrendered in one area of life and totally controlling in another area.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad you hearkened back to that. Thank you. Yeah, that's good. That's a good response, I think. Also, there are other things. I mean, if I were to, cross over the line to to the other side, I would say that um, dancing, exercise,
Mm-hmm.
singing,
Mm-hmm.
that these somehow that it's possible that the life force energy can be increased by these activities. It seems to
Yeah.
me. I mean, I can't think of I can heart well there. I can think of many things, but there's not that many things I think that are as joyful as singing, for instance. And a lot of people feel the same way about dancing. And I certainly feel better after exercising and feel more alive. So I think that those are good things. And also the other thing is you mentioned breathing, and I think that's a very important key because when we breathe in, we're actually taking in the life force.
Yeah. And spirit actually, I think, means breath or something. So there's
Sure.
definitely a connection there.
Yeah, inspire is in take in breath.
I had a years ago, I wanted to learn how to sing better because I didn't have a good voice. So I heard about this teacher that, did singing lessons in our area. And she would basically do almost like modified Qigong exercises
Hmm.
that would result in me sounding like Sinatra. And believe me, I do not sound like Sinatra normally.
Wow.
And I was amazed, like, it would take an hour to go through all these exercises, but, it was basically opening up energy channels. And then this voice would come through that was like, who sang that? That's amazing.
Wow.
And so she was the best Qigong teacher I'd ever had, even though she said that she didn't even know what Qigong was. But she just discovered a way to open up to the life force energy doing these simple exercises with the voice. So I do believe that they're all connected and that different people might have different ways of opening up to that energy, the surrender path, the breath path, the Tai Chi path, the Qigong path, the acupuncture path, all of these are possible ways to open to that.
Yeah, and I think that's a good reminder not to be too dogmatic about it all.
Yeah,
To
yeah.
realize that everyone's different.
Well, how about martial arts? When you think of somebody like Bruce Lee, who would, go through 10 boards, and or whatever the crazy stuff he could do, he obviously had some kind of energy moving through him that he was able to channel.
Sure, in the same way with when you hear stories about mothers who lift cars
Right,
off their
right.
babies, or that that pajama game exercise that we used to do where we would lift a body with our fingers. Did you ever do that
All
one?
right. Uh-huh. That was a fun game.
Yeah.
So, people can find their own way. I'm curious whether you can have both wings of the plane simultaneously, where you're using the quote surrender technique and call it manipulation. I don't like that word for it, but the enhancement technique.
Oh yeah, enhancement technique is a better word, I think. I think it may be possible. I'm imagining, for example, let's say I was going to go into singing practice and I just sat for a moment and allowed my voice to be exactly the way it is, whether it's good or bad that day. And as I did my exercises and my scales and sang and looked for the placement and noticed it, I, at the same time, was allowing everything to be as it is. I was relaxing. I was beingness at the time. So I was keeping aware of the awareness in which it's happening and letting the voice open up. So there's one case where I can imagine it's possible. And I bet you there are tons of others.
Yeah, yeah, I think it's possible. Something that I find curious is, does the life force energy have certain characteristics? Like when I tune into it, I would say it feels kind of creative. It feels high, whatever that is. I'd say it has a sense of compassion to it. But as I said, I do know people who do a fair amount of practice that maybe they feel high, but I haven't noticed that they're necessarily more loving or more compassionate. So I'm mixed into understanding what does accessing this energy actually do for a person. I think it definitely makes people feel more peaceful potentially.
Yes, I think it's possible. And I couldn't really judge without looking at each individual case as to why that is, as you describe. But the only thing I would add is that I think the life force may be only part of the equation. I believe a shift in identity is necessary as well. In other words, a shift in identity to the background of awareness, to the knowingness or beingness in which all experience appears. And that, even though, and here's a kind of a contradiction, or even though it has no qualities of its own, because any quality that you can name is known by it, at the same time, it does seem to have certain qualities which I can put in the category of unconditional love, because it allows everything to appear in it. And it seems like when we hang out there, or when we identify as that background of pure awareness, that feeling of unconditional love starts to waft its perfume into the individual and our lives.
Waft the perfume. I love that phrase. And you don't get many chances to use the word waft either, you know.
That's true.
It harkens back to older times.
Of course, that harkens back to Rupert Spira and Francis Lucille, who used the phrase perfume, where I picked it up from. So it's not totally, I can't claim it as original to me.
Yeah. But you made a good point that life force energy, without shift in identity, without the witness, awareness, or beingness, is just more energy, and that can go off track. Whereas if it is put in the context, or if your identity is starting to shift into this broader perspective, then it probably mitigates difficulties.
Yeah, well said.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm picturing, like a garden hose. A garden hose with no water pressure going through it isn't a problem. You put huge amounts of pressure through it, you better have it pointed in the right direction, or you're going to create trouble. So that might be an interesting thing. Any other thoughts about this whole subject of life force energy?
Yeah, I do have one other thought, which is another reason I wanted to talk about this subject. And it's because in non-dual spirituality, you hear a lot of talk about how the separate self doesn't exist, the body doesn't exist, or it's something that needs to be transcended. But how can universal energy be expressed if not through form?
Mm-hmm.
So form isn't something to be ignored or to be seen through or to be transcended, but instead as seen as none other than the universe, all that is rising and falling in temporary appearances, not separate from anything else, but colored and shaped by the characteristics of the temporary forms, that is, our individual bodies, minds, and personalities.
Yeah, that perspective allows a little bit more freedom to be your unique self without thinking that as unspiritual.
Yes. Good summary.
Can I be a jerk and spiritual?
Well, the idea of spiritual or not is kind of problematic. The idea of jerk or not is kind of problematic in a way too. So I don't have a good answer to that, except maybe both and.
Well, it reminds me, and I won't use names here, but I was talking to one of the very well-known teachers who we interviewed here, and I was at a retreat with this person. I was asking him, I think we're friendly with each other. I was asking him who his teachers were, and it was hysterical to me. He says his teacher, I don't even remember his teacher's name, but he said he's like such a paradox because his energy was so amazing that it was almost hard to be in a room with him. But he was eating nonstop donuts. He was cursing. He was would really be somewhat abusive to people at times. And it just was hard for this guy to understand, why is he emanating a billion watts of love while eating Twinkies, never exercising, being obese, all these things, which which shows how little we really know about anything. And he was there just to get the energy, and he did, and it certainly transformed him.
Yeah,
So
well, that does harken back to my point that the life force energy uses the form as it is to express
yeah,
itself.
yeah. I always find those cases really interesting because they kind of eat away at my belief system. Things should be this way, people should be this way, life force energy should be this way. When all of that is loosened, it does feel a little bit more freeing.
That's a good thing, I think.
Yeah, yeah. And I know that when I do certain practices and stop eating so many donuts, that I tend to feel more peaceful and happier and loving. And that's really all I need to know.
That's right. Can't
Yeah,
argue with that.
yeah, yeah. So on a practical level, I tell people find what works for you and what keeps you from allowing more of this life force energy to move through you.
Yeah.
Because some things probably have a little bit of impact and some things have a lot of impact. For me, I can eat a donut every now and then, little impact, but busyness has a big impact in keeping me from feeling my life force energy.
Interesting.
Yeah. And that's a big problem nowadays for a lot of us.
It is. It is a big problem. For me, busyness, it depends on the kind of busyness.
Uh-huh.
For me, the quality of the busyness. If it's busy doing stuff that I just have to do and I really don't enjoy doing, but sometimes busyness is being busy, being creative, and that's the life force flowing through the Brian character.
That's a great point. When I'm busy writing books, I'm feeling the life force energy more than any other time, probably.
Hmm.
Yeah, very good point. Well, I appreciate the discussion, and I always broaden my perspective. So thank you, Brian.
Me
And
too.
I hear you have a meditation for us.
I do. Yeah, a life force meditation. And so here goes. Take a moment now to settle in. You don't need to change anything about your posture unless your body naturally wants to adjust. Let the body sit or lie in a way that feels simple, unforced. And gently allow your eyes to close or just soften your gaze. Begin by noticing your breath, not controlling it, not shaping it, just noticing. Your body is already breathing. Air is already moving in and out. Life is already happening. See if you can sense that. See if you can sense the breath is not something you're doing, it's something that's happening. Something is breathing you. And as you notice that, you may begin to feel into this quiet mystery. There is a life force here, a movement, an aliveness. You didn't create it, you're not managing it, and yet it's here, animating everything. Feel the subtle pulsing in the body, maybe in the hands, the chest, the face, or just a general sense of aliveness. See if you can get a sense that this life force is what beats the heart. digests food, heals wounds, forms thoughts, moves emotions, all without asking for your permission. And for a moment, just let that be seen, that life is living itself through this body, through this mind. You're not separate from it, but you're also not the controller of it. There may be a habit of trying to direct life, to improve it, to shape it into something better, to become something more. And you don't have to fight that habit. Just notice it gently, without judgment. And now, see if there can be a small shift. Instead of trying to manage life, what if you simply allow it? What if nothing needs to be added, nothing needs to be taken away for life to express itself fully? Right now, is there anything you need to do for the breath to happen? Is there anything you need to do for awareness to be present? Or is it already here, effortlessly? This same effortless movement is what expresses as your talents, your abilities, your creativity, even your limitations. All of it is part of the same universal force expressing itself through an individual temporary form. Notice if there's any tension around needing to be different, more capable, more clear, more successful, more whatever. And just let that tension be felt. No need to fix it. Because even that tension is part of the life force moving. Nothing is outside of it. And so, instead of trying to perfect the expression, what if you simply stop interfering? Not by force, but by seeing that interference is unnecessary. Life already knows how to express itself. The tree doesn't try to grow. The heart doesn't try to beat. And in the same way, this life force already knows how to move through you, through your voice, your thoughts, your actions, your relationships, even through your uncertainties. So for a few moments, rest as that allowing, and let everything be as it is. Breath moving, sensations arising, thoughts appearing and disappearing, all happening on their own. And you're simply the space in which it unfolds. Nothing to push away, nothing to hold on to. Just this. And if a thought comes in like, I should be doing this better, or I'm not allowing enough, just notice. That too is life. Even the idea of getting out of the way can be gently released. Because the idea that there is a separate you standing in the way is just a thought, just a temporary appearance, just like sensations and perceptions. There's only life moving as everything. And as this becomes clearer, there can be a natural relaxation, a softening, a quiet trust that this life continues to unfold perfectly in its own way. Not according to an ideal, but according to its own intelligence. And your role, if we can even call it that, is simply to be here, aware, open, available, letting life express itself through this temporary form with its strengths, its quirks, its gifts, its limits, nothing excluded. Now, take a nice, easy, deep breath, and at your own pace, slowly open your eyes if they're closed. Carrying with you this simple recognition: life is already happening, and it doesn't need your interference to be what it is. Thank you.
I really like that one, Brian, because I think that meditation is kind of like the antidote to the worst aspects of my view of spirituality that are more of a manipulative nature. You know, that wing of the plane, so to speak, has its good points and it has its limitations, as does the quote allowing wing as well. And my philosophy is that whatever wing you tend towards, it's good to do the other one.
Yeah, sure.
Or, because that's the area of most growth in a certain way. But I don't know if that's always true. That's just a philosophy I have, that you lean towards a direction that you're, if you're falling off a beam towards the right, you should lean to the left. If you're falling off a beam to the left, you should lean to the right.
Sure.
Maybe that's true, maybe not.
If you have intense energy flowing through you and you treat everybody horribly, maybe you need to develop a little on the loving kindness wing.
Yeah, exactly. And vice versa.
And vice versa.
But I found it really very expanding to look at things like, I'm not at odds with this behavior. That's the life force moving through me. And that puts a whole different spin on it in a way that I felt was valuable for me.
Great. Glad to hear it.
And for our listeners, if you want more valuable behind the scenes stuff, you can support us for as little as $1 a month, I think. Go to patreon.com/awareness explorers. And you've been very persistent, Brian, in sending people all kinds of goodies each month who support us. So what do you send? What's your thoughts about that?
Well, I try and send something about once a month. And the thing that we most often send, which I find I enjoy putting together, is sometimes after we stop our session or after we sign off.
Yeah.
After we say, keep exploring, sometimes the conversation continues. Sometimes you and me, sometimes with the guest, and sometimes stuff that we didn't think of raising comes up. And so I love to send those out as a little bonus to our Patreon supporters.
Yeah, we used to not record that, and then we'd say, "Oh my God, that was fantastic! We should have recorded that." And so now we don't stop the recording until we literally leave the Zoom room. So
Right.
that's been good. Well, thank you for that, Brian. And I thought it was a good discussion. I really loved the meditation. Any last thoughts?
No, I really enjoy exploring this with you. It's so much fun, and it kind of makes makes me high.
Yeah, yeah. Hopefully, some of our listeners as well.
Hmm.
So, until next time, friends, keep exploring.
Keep exploring.
Thank you for listening to Awareness Explorers. To learn more, you can check out our website at awarenessexplorers.com. Please subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast app. We'd love it if you would post a review. And please share our link with family and friends, because knowing yourself as awareness is the greatest gift you can give yourself or someone you love.